really fascinating to me.
Yeah,
You know, it's really fascinating to me how people are just drawn to stories about ghosts and things we can't explain.
yeah, it's everywhere, right? I mean, think about it. You've got online forums, Reddit threads are just packed with them.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got the ghost hunting shows. I mean, everybody knows at least one of those
Right. And it's like people share these personal stories, these encounters,
that really make you think.
yeah, that challenge your understanding of reality,
Yeah.
you know. And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay, so let's lay it all out. What exactly are we exploring?
Well, we're looking at the psychic and spiritual side of these ghost encounters, these unexplained events, and we're going deep.
Deep dive, exactly. So, where's all this information coming from? What are our sources?
So we've got a really interesting mix. We're looking at personal stories from Reddit, tons of comments on YouTube videos, and then some insights from people who actually go out and hunt ghosts.
All right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's define a few things just so everybody's on the same page.
Good idea.
When we say ghosts, what do we mean? What about metaphysical experiences?
Right. So when we say ghosts or apparitions, we're talking about, that classic idea of a spirit,
Mm.
but they're actually different types.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you've got intelligent hauntings where the spirit seems to be aware and might even interact with you.
Spooky.
And then the residual hauntings, which are more like echoes of the past, kind of like an energetic recording.
Huh, that's interesting.
Then you've got those metaphysical experiences, which are a bit more subtle. We're talking about sensing energy, altered states of consciousness, and those strange coincidences that make you wonder if there's something more going on.
Like fate or something.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's just unexplained phenomena in general, which could be anything, really.
That's a pretty broad category.
It is. And then there's the psychic stuff, those intuitive feelings, and then spiritual experiences, which can be about feeling connected to something bigger than yourself.
So where do the ghost hunters fit in?
Oh, they're the ones who go out and actually investigate all of these claims using different methods and tools.
Okay, so the goal of this deep dive isn't to prove or disprove anything about ghosts, right?
No, it's more about understanding what people are experiencing, trying to find some common threads, and even looking at how our minds might be playing a role.
Right. So let's jump in and start with those Reddit stories. I know you've been spending a lot of time in those forums.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that stand out to you?
Well, one thing that's really striking is how often people report unusual sensory perceptions, things they see, hear, even feel.
Give me an example.
Okay, so on a subreddit called Our Ghosts, someone shared a story about how they and their father both heard a whisper of the person's name.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and then there are tons of reports about unexplained sounds like footsteps, knocking, crashes, even music.
Is there a pattern to what people are seeing?
There seems to be one of the most common things people describe are shadow figures like a black mass blocking a doorway, that kind of thing.
That sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it.
Oh, and people report seeing full-blown apparitions too, like one person described a silvery woman who resembled a deceased relative.
Wow. So it's interesting that most of these experiences seem to be visual or auditory. You know what I mean?
Right, it makes you think, right, maybe our brains are just wired to pay extra attention to those senses
Right.
to help us detect threats.
In a primal way.
Exactly, and that might make us more likely to interpret something we see or hear in a certain way, especially if we're already feeling a bit spooked.
Makes sense. So it's not just about the senses, though, right? These experiences can really affect people emotionally.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people describe feeling fear, unease, but there's also curiosity and intrigue. And for some, these encounters actually shift their whole belief system.
That's powerful.
It is, and it's not always about typical ghost sightings either. Some people report objects moving on their own lights, turning on and off, and even having dreams that seem to predict the future.
Premonitions, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And this connects to what people are sharing about those more metaphysical experiences, the idea of sensing energies, maybe even seeing them as light or colors.
I've heard about that.
And then there's the idea of communicating with spirits through voices or dreams. And some people describe reaching altered states of consciousness through meditation or even having out-of-body experiences.
Wow, it's almost like they're tapping into a different reality.
Right. And let's not forget those synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem too perfect to be random.
Okay, so now let's talk about the ghost hunters, the people who go out looking for these experiences. What can we learn from their perspective?
Well, a lot of them emphasize the importance of intuition, that psychic sensitivity that allows them to pick up on things others might miss.
So it's not just about the gadgets and the technology.
No, not at all. They often talk about having strong emotional or even physical responses when they're in a supposedly haunted location.
Like chills or feeling uneasy.
Exactly. Or even more intense reactions, like needing to leave immediately.
And they interpret their findings through that spiritual lens, right?
Right. They often believe that spirits can manipulate things like electromagnetic fields, which is why they use EMF meters and spirit boxes to try and capture evidence.
Makes sense.
And they often see cold spots as a sign of a spirit drawing energy from the environment.
So it's not always about proving ghosts exist, but sometimes about trying to help them.
Right. Some ghost hunters see themselves as kind of like paranormal therapists trying to help spirits who might be trapped or unable to move on.
Interesting. Now, you have to imagine that constantly being in these environments could take a toll on you.
It definitely does. A lot of ghost hunters talk about feeling fear, anxiety, sometimes even being overwhelmed by the emotions they experience.
But I guess there's also a thrill to it, right? That adrenaline rush.
Oh, yeah, there's definitely a sense of excitement that comes with the unknown.
Now, we should also talk about the skeptics, the
Mm.
people who approach all of this with a more critical eye.
Right, the skeptics often point to the lack of scientific evidence to support claims of paranormal activity.
Which is a fair point.
And they tend to offer alternative explanations for the things that people experience, like visual illusions or fluctuations in electromagnetic fields that have perfectly normal causes.
So they're looking for more down-to-earth explanations.
Exactly. And they often critique the methods that ghost hunters use, saying they're not scientifically rigorous.
Okay, so let's talk about those methods for a minute. Things like EVP recording or using trigger objects to try and provoke a response. How much do those practices actually influence what people experience?
That's the big question, isn't it? These practices can actually create a really strong expectation, and that can influence how people perceive things.
Like if you're already expecting a certain response.
Exactly. For instance, if you're using a spirit box and you ask a question, you might be primed to hear any random sound as a meaningful answer.
That's confirmation bias, right? You're looking for evidence to support what you already believe.
Exactly. And the environment itself often plays a role. Ghost hunts usually happen in dark, quiet places, which can heighten suggestibility,
So you're already on edge.
right? And within the ghost hunting community, those shared beliefs and interpretations can really amplify these experiences.
It's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, and you can see this with something like the Estes method, where they use random words to try and get a response from a spirit,
I've heard of that one.
right? If the ghost hunter is expecting a response, they might latch on to any word that seems even remotely relevant.
Even if it's just coincidence.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the sensory experiences, the emotional responses, the spiritual interpretations, and the tools and techniques used by ghost hunters.
And we've seen that there are these contrasting perspectives, the believers and the skeptics, each with their own way of making sense of it all.
And that really highlights how personal and subjective these encounters are. What one person interprets as a ghost, another might explain away completely.
Which brings us to a final thought for our listeners. What psychological and spiritual needs might these experiences fulfill? What does our fascination with the unknown reveal about us as humans?
It's a question